I met my wife Mary in high school. I was in my third year and sitting in the stands with my friends waiting for the Friday night football game to start. A group of second-year girls sat in front of us. As the game progressed, we took turns going to the snack stand. When it was my turn to go, a pretty blonde named Mary came with me. We brought back hot dogs, fries, and soda, and Mary and I ended up sitting together. She was beautiful, smart, had a good sense of humor, and, most importantly, she didn't have a boyfriend. Midway through the third quarter, someone shouted, "Shall we go to McDonald's after the game?" Almost everyone agreed that the guys and girls from our group would continue to have fun at the nearest McDonald's. Deciding to take a chance, I turned to Mary and asked, "I'd rather have pizza instead of greasy fries. Do you want to go to Tony's Pizza?" I was delighted when she agreed. Mary and I met once a week for several weeks and seemed to enjoy each other's company. We decided to date seriously 2 months into the relationship, and things only got better. Mary was my prom date, and I was over the moon to escort the most beautiful girl in our school to the dance. I was in heaven until I was on earth. 2 weeks later, on the Monday before graduation, I ran to the tennis courts for team practice. I ran with my neighbor Julie Burke. Julie was on the girls' team. I was a little taken aback when Julie said, "You're a really nice guy." "Julie, we've known each other our whole lives," I replied. "Why are you saying this now?" She tapped me on the shoulder as we were running and said, "It's great that you let Mary go to the prom with Jimmy Bay. Otherwise, he's so shy and a nerd, he would never have gotten the chance to go." Jimmy Bay was a nice guy, but definitely shy, a nerd, and, I suspect, autistic. He was Mary's neighbor, and she always took care of him. I wasn't surprised that Mary agreed to go to prom, but I was upset that she didn't bother to tell me. By Friday afternoon, 6 people had complimented me on my maturity. They thought it was great that my steady girlfriend could be escorted to prom by her friend and neighbor. Truth be told, I didn't feel mature. It pissed me off that Mary didn't have the courage to tell me about the prom. I knew she would confess on our regular Friday night date. She had no choice. At the last minute on Friday afternoon, I sent her a message and canceled the appointment. I was bombarded with text messages and voicemails asking me to call her. After a dozen dings on my phone, I finally sent Mary a text message. "I've known about your prom date since Monday. At least 10 people told me about this. It's a pity that you weren't among them. I want a girl I can trust. That's not you." I turned off the phone and went into my thoughts. Mary and I started dating again at the beginning of the next school year. It was Friday afternoon, and I was walking to my car in the student parking lot. Mary was sitting on the hood of my car when I approached. "Would you let your old friend buy you ice cream at Dairy Queen?" she asked. That's how it all started. We were together for the next 2 years. The second year, we were in a long-distance relationship as I was in college in New York. I visited home often and was happy that we exchanged virginities on a Saturday night in March, shortly after her 18th birthday. Mary and I dated until she went to college the following year. 2 weeks into her first course, I received an email titled, "Dear John." She seemed to be having too much fun in college and didn't want to be tied down with a steady boyfriend. I never called or wrote. I was popular, got good grades, and played Division Roman III tennis. I replaced Mary with a steady stream of girls starting the next evening. I didn't see Mary until 2 years after she graduated from college. I was working as an engineer for a local defense contractor and was at a bar with coworkers after a long week. We literally ran into each other at the bar. We talked for a few minutes before returning to our friends. I'll admit, I followed her for the next hour and couldn't decide if I should follow her into the parking lot when her group started to disperse. I chuckled as Mary's friends left. She went to the bar, sat on a stool, and ordered a drink. When her order was brought to her, she turned in her chair and looked at our table. I watched her with a goofy grin as guys approached her one by one, and she turned them down each time. It was only when she looked me straight in the eyes and raised 2 fingers that I apologized to my friends and approached her. I had to wait until Mary had blown off another guy before I was next to her. 2? I asked. Mary smiled and said, yes, if you would let 2 more guys approach me, I would agree to invite one of them. Mary and I dated for almost 6 months before we became an exclusive couple and moved in together. We got married 10 months later and lived a happy and completely satisfied life for almost 5 years. My day started early. I had a meeting with a longtime client and friend at 7:30 a.m. We were meeting at the Marriott in downtown New Haven, Connecticut, home of the incredibly overrated university that begins with Y. Tony was already sitting in the conference room I had booked. We chatted for a few minutes while I set up my laptop, laid out all the necessary papers, and poured myself a mug of hot black coffee. Tony is a civilian contractor assigned by his company to work on the propulsion system for the next generation of us Navy submarines. I am a senior mechanical engineer. My company is a defense contractor specializing in marine mechanics. Over the past few years, we have successfully worked together on 3 small but important contracts. For some reason, our immediate superiors were resisting our ongoing negotiations. We were told that we had one more chance to resolve 7 critical issues before other people from our companies took over the negotiations. Tony and I worked non-stop for lunch and finally caught our breath at 2:15 p.m. Do you think your company will accept it this time? I shrugged and said, honestly, I don't understand why our last 2 proposals weren't accepted. Tony asked, you and I have become close over the years. Do you think this could be a test to see if we're too close? I laughed and admitted, I thought about that too, and then stretched wearily and shrugged again. How about a drink? Tony suggested. I picked up my notebook and said, I have over 30 pages of notes here that need to be sorted out. Drinking won't make this any easier. I'll stay here and transfer important decisions to the laptop. I'll send you a memo of understanding before 9 a.m. tomorrow. If there are any, it's a misunderstanding. We'll call you right away. I need to submit a report by noon tomorrow. Okay, Tony said, packing up his computer. I walked him to the hotel lobby and then went to the gift shop and bought a Diet Coke before heading back to the conference room. As soon as I entered the room, it seemed to me that the walls began to shrink. Deciding to change my location, I packed my things and moved to a quiet corner of the hotel lobby. Contacted the office and learned that some minor problems had arisen over the morning. Then I sent my wife a message asking her to go out to dinner without me. I settled into a comfortable chair in the lobby and started working. The change of location helped, and I was able to focus and get a lot done over the next couple of hours. I was so immersed in my work that I'm still surprised how her laughter caught my attention. I looked up and recognized Jenny, my sister-in-law, walking through the hotel lobby in a little black dress and sexy heels. She walked straight to the reception desk. If that weren't weird enough, her arm was wrapped around the arm of a tall, handsome man. The man was not Jenny's husband, Scott. Without thinking, I turned on the camera on my phone and took a few pictures of the couple as they checked in. One photo particularly angered me when the man's hand came down and he squeezed her buttock tightly. I took a few more pictures as they walked towards the elevator and a final shot as they entered the elevator and kissed. When the elevator doors closed, I quickly walked over and saw that the indicator showed that they got off on the 8th floor. I was angry and confused. I loved Jenny and considered her husband my best friend. I admit I was in a state of shock when I sat back down. Between the intense negotiations that lasted all day and the shock of seeing Jenny with another man, my brain was overloaded. I didn't notice the man sitting next to me until he extended his hand. He said, "Hi, my name is James, and I'm the manager of the Marriott." We shook hands, and I replied, "Hi, James. I'm Chris Harrington. I rented conference room L122 today." James nodded in understanding, then asked, "I saw you taking pictures of a couple who just checked in. Do you know them?" After a moment, I replied, "I know the woman." "Can we assume that you were surprised to see her with her companion?" "I was very surprised," I said. "Mr. Harrington, can I be frank?" After I nodded, he continued, I'm worried there will be trouble if you stay here. I've never gotten into this kind of trouble you're talking about. I've never been close to it. There might be a confrontation, but I'll leave before we disturb your guests." James looked around the lobby. It was pretty quiet there, and no one seemed to pay any attention to us. He handed me a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it and saw the man's name and address on it. James asked, "Do you think there will be less confrontation now that you have this information?" We shook hands again, and I said, "I can almost guarantee it." I got back to work and was able to get a surprising amount done, despite glancing at the elevator bank every few seconds. By the time Jenny and her companion exited the elevator, almost 3 hours had passed. My bag was packed, and I was up and heading towards them before they took 2 steps into the lobby. I held the phone in front of my face and filmed as I approached the couple. Jenny was confused at first, but when I lowered the camera, her jaw dropped and she visibly paled. "I would kiss you like usual, but I don't want to taste your boyfriend on your lips." "Chris, what are you doing here?" "I'm here for meetings. And you?" I saw Jenny trying to calm down. After a moment, she said, "Chris, meet Mike Charmat. We work together. We're here to tour the venues for our agency's upcoming event." I looked at Mike as he extended his hand. "Nice to meet you, Chris." I ignored his hand and asked, "Mike, really? Can I ask you a question?" Mike and Jenny exchanged intense glances before I asked, "Do you think Jenny is more attractive in those sexy, tight jeans, tight blouse, and boots?" I waved my hand, indicating how Jenny was currently dressed, or the hot black dress she wore when you walked up to the 8th floor to explore the halls 3 hours ago. Before they could say anything, I looked at Mike's left hand. "Nice engagement ring, Mike. I see you're just as much a lying, cheating piece of crap as my precious sister-in-law." At this point, poor Mike lost his cool. Through gritted teeth, he said, "Listen, asshole, you have no idea what's going on. Just mind your own business, and I won't screw you over." "Sorry, Mike, but cheating on my bitch sister-in-law with a worthless scumbag like you is my business." I slowly put both my hands behind my back and continued, "As for screwing me over, I'll give you the first hit for free. You better make it a good one, because after you hit me, I'll beat you up, send you to the hospital, and then call the cops and file a crime against you." Complaint. I fell silent and smiled. Mike turned to Jenny and said angrily, "Can you deal with this asshole? I'm leaving." Without waiting for an answer, he headed towards the exit of the hotel. I couldn't help myself. As Mike walked toward the exit, I said, "If I were you, I'd warn your wife. I'll call her." Mike stopped and turned around slowly. Looking at Jenny, he repeated, "Please sort this out, Jenny." When Mike left the hotel, Jenny put her hand on my arm and said, "Chris, can we go to the bar and have a drink?" I was tempted, but quickly decided not to agree. "Sorry, Jenny, I wasted a few hours waiting for your love party to end." Jenny winced as I continued, "I need to go home, have a drink, and figure out how to tell Scott and Mike's wife." Jenny squeezed my hand and pleaded, "I only do this when Scott is away. It doesn't mean anything. I'm not hurting him." "How long have you known me, Jenny?" She did not answer, but looked carefully into my eyes. "I think about 12 years since I first started dating Mary at school, right?" After a short pause, I said angrily, "And in all this time, what makes you think I wouldn't tell my best friend that his wife is a lying cheater?" As I turned to leave, I met the gaze of James, the hotel manager. He nodded gratefully as I walked out through the revolving doors. The traffic ended as I began the half-hour drive north on I-91 home. I set the cruise control to 78 miles per hour and turned up the volume on the country music radio. The only irritation during the trip was the constant calls and messages on my phone. It seemed like my wife was urgently trying to contact me. I pulled into the garage and closed the door behind me. As I got out of the car, I heard the voice of my wife, Mary. She stood in the open door leading from the garage to the kitchen of our apartment. "Where the hell have you been?" she asked. I walked past her and entered the kitchen. After I threw my work things on the table, I noticed Mary's phone lying on the kitchen table next to a half-empty glass of wine. I took her phone, entered the password, and opened her text messages. I saw that my message, sent many hours ago, had been read, so I said, "You know where I was. You read the message." That's not what I meant, and you know it. I headed into the living room to pour myself a couple of fingers of bourbon and said over my shoulder, "Then explain what you mean." When I returned to the kitchen, Mary was sitting at the table. She asked, "What did you do to upset Jenny?" As far as I know, I didn't do anything to upset Jenny. Jenny, on the other hand, upset me a lot. I watched Mary gather her thoughts as I sat down opposite her. "Did you know Jenny was cheating on Scott?" My direct question took her by surprise. She said it only happened once. "Well, that's a lie," I said. "Jenny told me she only cheats when Scott is on a business trip." After a short pause, I continued, "I noticed that you didn't answer my question. Did you know that your sister was cheating on Scott?" Mary sighed, took a long sip of wine, and said, "Chris, this is between Scott and Jenny." I smiled and said, "That's the first thing I agree with. It's really up to them. My problem is that Scott doesn't know about the problem that needs to be addressed urgently." "Damn it, it's none of your business," Mary exploded. "I want you to keep your mouth shut." I leaned forward, rested my elbows on the kitchen table, and clasped my fingers together in a prayer gesture. "You know me, Mary. You know me better than anyone." Mary expected to continue, but was stunned when I stood up and quickly walked towards the kitchen archway. I stopped for a moment, then turned around. "I asked you 3 times yesterday if you knew that Jenny was cheating, and you refused to answer. I'll ask again, how long have you known about it?" "You know Jenny, she's always been a little wild." 0 out of 3 was my immediate reaction. What does it mean? It means you refuse to answer a question that I consider critical to our marriage. "What Jenny does when Scott is away has nothing to do with our marriage," Mary said confidently. "Let's see." I leaned on the arch and began to count on my fingers. "First of all, my relationship with your sister will never be the same now that I know she is a lying bitch. Every holiday we celebrate with your family, I will remember your sister's betrayal. Secondly, you gave me every reason to believe that you knew about her vile behavior, and I remain in the dark whether you approve of it. It's not fair, Chris. Thirdly, although I don't travel as often as Scott, I do go on a trip once a month. For the first time in our relationship, I have to wonder if you've been cheating on me." Mary's eyes opened wide, and she exploded, "How dare you accuse me of cheating?" I immediately intervened and responded with equal intensity. "I never accused you of cheating, but your flippant attitude towards your sister's infidelity makes me wonder if you did the same." I stopped and glared at my wife before continuing. "You and I both know that you can't prove that you didn't cheat. All I have is my trust in you, and now that trust has been greatly shaken." I turned and headed to my home office. After researching Mike Charmot on the internet, confirming that he was married, and making 2 unsuccessful calls to his house, I decided to take on one last unpleasant matter. I sent a text message to my brother-in-law Scott. "You're coming home on Friday, right?" 10 minutes passed before he replied, "Yes, landing at 2:30 p.m. Meet me at the pit stop. I'll be there at 4. "Does this have something to do with Jenny's panicked call wanting to know if we were talking?" Scott asked. I was trying to decide how to answer when my phone rang. I replied, "Hi, Scott," turning to face the wall. I wasn't going to hide my words from Mary, but I wasn't going to make it easy for her to hear the conversation through a closed door. "What's going on, Chris?" "It's so bad, Scott. Are you sure you want to talk about this over the phone?" After a short pause, Scott asked, "Is she cheating on me?" "Yes," I replied. The silence lasted for several minutes and was interrupted only by occasional sobs. "See you at the pit stop," he said. The call ended immediately. I was going to text Scott and let him know that I was available to talk anytime, but I decided to leave my friend alone. I was sure that he knew that I supported him and was always ready to help. Mary calmed down while I talked to Scott. I'm sure she was trying to eavesdrop. After I hung up, I heard her say through the closed door, "Please come to the kitchen. We need to talk." I actually considered going to our guest bedroom, but decided to finish the bourbon sitting on the kitchen counter. After settling into the kitchen chair across from Mary, I took a long sip of Knob Creek and enjoyed the slight burn in my throat. I glanced at my wife and noticed how thoughts were spinning in her head, preparing for the next attack. My brain was dead. I had almost no strength left to fight, and I knew that the last sip of alcohol would not help. I was waiting for Mary to start talking when my phone started vibrating in my pocket. "Damn it!" I exploded. "When will this damn day end?" I pulled out my phone, looked at the screen, and saw a number I didn't recognize, which only added to my immense disappointment. I answered the call with an aggressive hello. A woman's voice answered, "Sorry I'm calling so late. My name is Colleen Charmat. Someone from this number called our house twice this evening. These calls were very upsetting to my husband, and I suspect the caller wanted to talk to me." With a heavy sigh, I said, "Colleen, my name is Chris Harrington. I called earlier and wanted to talk to you." With a somewhat dark tone, Colleen said, "Let me guess. You're calling to tell me that my husband is cheating with your wife." "Almost," I replied. "He's cheating with my sister-in-law. Her name is Jennifer Palmer, and I think they work together." There was a long pause before she answered, "This is the third time I've received a call like this, and this will be the last. How can a man do this to his wife and 4 children?" I knew the question was rhetorical, so instead I suggested, "I have photos of them checking into the Marriott in downtown New Haven together, kissing in the elevator as the doors close, and returning to the lobby almost 3 hours later." Jenny was dressed differently after their date. The rest of the call amounted to an exchange of email addresses and a promise that I would send photos in the morning. After I hung up, Mary said, "Jenny told me he's in an open marriage." This is a lie. His wife and 4 children believe they are in a monogamous marriage and a happy family. Mary looked shocked, holding her hands to her face. I continued, "This appears to be the third time she's caught him cheating. She's going to divorce him." Mary was stunned looking at me. I swirled the last drops of bourbon in the glass before downing it in one gulp. After rinsing the glass in the sink, I headed to our bedroom. As I lay in bed and thought about everything that had happened to my extended family over the past few hours, I came to the conclusion that I was not to blame for all this sadness and destruction. As usual, my alarm went off at 5 a.m. Instead of starting the day working out in our basement, I quickly showered, got dressed, and headed to work. I didn't try to run away from Mary. I needed to get into the office and complete the memorandum of understanding and send it to Tony. Thursday was busy. Tony and I talked on the phone for 45 minutes to fine-tune the wording on several points, but I easily sent the completed agreement to my boss before the noon deadline. I spent the afternoon sorting through emails from the previous day and headed home at 5 p.m. as usual. I wondered what awaited me that evening and was only half surprised when I turned onto our street and saw Jenny's car and her parents' car parked in front of my house. "It's going to be a long damn night," I muttered as I pressed the button to open the garage door. "What did you say to Scott?" was the first question from Jenny when I closed the door behind me. Looking furiously at my frightened wife, I said, "I'm going to go get changed. I'll be back in a few minutes, but I warn you, if I'm disrespected in my house, I will physically throw everyone out the door. That includes you, Mary." I didn't wait for an answer and quickly headed to our bedroom. After contemplating escaping through the bedroom window, I decided to meet Mary and her family. It was hard to pass by an open bottle of bourbon, but I decided a clearer head would be wiser. My second thought was, screw it, and I walked back to the bar. 1 inch didn't seem like enough, and 2 inches was beyond my norm for polite conversation, so I settled on an inch and a half of my favorite amber drink. All eyes were on me as I returned to the kitchen. Everyone was sitting at the table. There was an empty seat between Mary and her father, Steve. Instead of sitting down, I leaned against the kitchen table, watching the group and taking a sip of my drink. I liked my relatives. They were good, reliable people. Steve, my father-in-law, was a man I respected. He was straightforward, honest, and it was always clear what he thought of you. If you stay on his good side, then you couldn't have a better friend in the world. If you betray him, I am sure that he can make your life unbearable. Steve considered me and Scott his friends. My mother-in-law considered herself a great business person and an outstanding entrepreneur. She owned and operated a well-known local real estate agency with an excellent reputation. Although Betty was in charge of the day-to-day running of the business, everyone in the know knew that Steve was the brains behind its success. Would you be more comfortable sitting here? Mary patted the chair next to her. I've been sitting all day. I feel good here. Jenny came to her senses a little. She asked, "What did you tell Scott?" I thought for a second before answering. I sent him a message and asked to meet him when he got home tomorrow. I said it was urgent. Collecting my thoughts, I continued. Scott called and wanted to know what was wrong. After I confirmed that he wanted to discuss it over the phone, I told him that you were cheating on him. He cried for several minutes before he confirmed that we'll meet me. I was somewhat surprised by how devastated the family was. Mary cried and said, "I asked you not to interfere." I thought her statement was made for her family. I replied, "And I said it was my business." My mother-in-law intervened and said, "That's debatable." Before I could say anything, Jenny asked, "Are you meeting Scott tomorrow?" "Yes." "What are you going to tell him?" she asked. "I don't have much information for him. I sent him the photos I took and told him that you and Mike spent almost 3 hours together. I sent him Mike's name and address, as well as his wife's contact information. I think tomorrow I will be his support and a shoulder to lean on." "What about me, Chris?" Jenny asked. "Don't I deserve support?" I actually chuckled as I looked at everyone at the table. "I think you have enough support, Jenny. I will support Scott in this situation." "How do you know Scott doesn't cheat on Jenny when he's away on business? It's common for married men to cheat when they're away from home," commented Betty, the girl's mother. "Although I can't imagine Scott cheating, to be honest, I have to admit that I have no idea how he acts when he's away. Until yesterday, I never thought about Jenny cheating, or that is my wife cheating on me." The table erupted with cries of, "How dare you?" and "This is inappropriate." Mary was clearly shocked by my statement, so I intervened and continued. At least I was honest with Mary and told her that yesterday. Her flippant and dismissive attitude towards Jenny's infidelities bothers me. Steve, the girl's father, told me, "Mary never cheated on you. I can't believe you think so poorly of her." I knew I had to be careful with my next words. I didn't want to turn Steve against me. I deliberately lowered the volume and severity of my voice, looked Steve in the eye, and challenged him. "Prove it." After a few moments of silence, I continued, "Here's the thing, Steve. You can't prove that Mary didn't cheat on me." I raised my hand when the protests began. "All I have is 6 years of absolute trust in Mary. I told her last night that my trust in her has been shaken." "It's not fair, Chris." I interrupted before Mary could finish. "I asked you 3 times yesterday if you knew that Jenny was cheating on Scott. You refused to answer my question. Instead, you changed the subject. You didn't lie, but you were dishonest." "Yes." I looked at Mary as she admitted, "I knew about Jenny's affairs. I didn't support her, but I didn't want to create a mess like this." She waved her hands, pointing to our current problems. "I was hoping her affair would go away and Scott wouldn't find out." I nodded. Although I was very disappointed that Mary covered up her sister's infidelities, I could understand her desire to protect her sister. "Do you remember the conversation we had about being an exclusive couple a few weeks before you proposed to me?" asked Mary. When I nodded, she looked me straight in the eyes and said, I promise I haven't been romantically or intimately involved since then. In fact, I haven't been with another man since we started dating after college. Call me naive, but I saw the angel I married 5 years ago when she spoke those words. I love you and I believe you, I told my wife. Her family was kind enough to give us a few minutes before continuing their conversation. I could see that Steve was particularly pleased with the development of events. Betty asked, "What are you going to do with Scott?" "I will simply support my best friend, just like each of you will support Jenny. Scott deserves my support, and I will give it to him." The next 6 weeks were difficult. Scott moved out of the house and rented an apartment nearby. He immediately filed for a legal separation from Jenny, but refrained from filing for divorce. I had dinner with Scott every Wednesday, while Mary maintained a similar schedule with her sister. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was having lunch with a few coworkers at Clyde's BBQ and bar. We were sitting at a table for four when a man pulled out an empty chair and sat down across from me. "Hey, asshole, I bet you forgot about me." It took a few seconds before I could remember the name. "Hey, Mike, I heard Colleen dumped your cheating ass. What's it like being an absentee dad?" He grinned and said, "Go to hell, bastard. It's your fault." I looked at my friends, Carl and Joe, and saw that they were slightly amused. Turning my attention back to Mike, I replied, "Yes, your divorce is my fault." Mike laughed and admitted, "I guess it's my fault too. But there are so many married girls around that I can't stay faithful." I began to feel uneasy at Mike's response as he continued, "I guess I'm a sex addict and my thrill is getting married women into bed." Mike pushed Carl to his right. "That's what I did with Jenny, his sister-in-law. When her crybaby husband was out of town, I turned her into my personal bitch and shared and traded her with friends." He winked at me and said, "It was very popular and we used it for over a year. She enjoyed every second with me and my friends. I was ready to leave her frazzled ass when I ran into her and her sexy little sister at happy hour." His grin left no doubt about the rest of the conversation. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out an envelope, and threw it on the table next to my plate. It was an envelope in which photographs were kept. Mike's smirk told me everything I needed to know about the contents. I admit my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, but I'll be damned if I let that asshole see me falter. I took the envelope and put it in my sports jacket pocket. Trying to provoke me, Mike asked, "Aren't you going to show your friends? I bet they will be interested in seeing pictures and videos of your slutty wife and her slutty sister entertaining my boys. As wild and slutty as Jenny is, your wife is 10 times wilder." "What's the matter, asshole? You have nothing to say." I gritted my teeth, but I needed to answer. I said, "You must be the stupidest bastard in the world." His grin was still ear to ear when I told him, "When I give Jenny Scott's husband these photos, he will file for divorce. Since you are Jenny's direct supervisor, how long do you think it will take to sue you and your company? You'll be out of work in a week." It was hard, but I started laughing. The idiot knew he had underestimated me and was contemplating his next move when I said, "Did you know I grew up in this town?" "Why should I care where you grew up?" The asshole was in for a lot of pain, but I wouldn't rush it. "I know all the powerful people in town." Mike didn't look very impressed, so I continued, "I know the meanest bullshit too. I would like to suggest that you leave the city while your legs are still working." "Fuck you, creature. I am not afraid of you. I have witnessed that you threatened me." He pointed at Carl and Joe. They both laughed and Joe said, "He really is an idiot. You get divorced and you lose children. You will be fired from your job and will still have to pay child support and alimony. Best of all, I would advise you to look over your shoulder. Soon, someday soon you will find yourself in a world of pain." Mike smugly pushed back his chair, stood up and said, "Fuck you, asshole. You're just a cuckolded weakling." My mind went out of control when Mike left. Later, back in my office, I looked at the photographs and confirmed the most grotesque details imaginable for a happily married man. Candid photographs of Maria with 6 different men appeared. A second set of photographs showed Jenny performing many of the same actions. The video was even worse and broke my soul. After gathering my thoughts and putting aside the overwhelming sadness and anger, I called Scott and asked him to meet me for dinner. After another 15 minutes of staring into space, I invited a second person to join Scott and me. I had tears in my eyes as I sat at the table and continued to outline my plans. I knew I couldn't act normal around Mary. I had to leave. I traveled almost once a month with my company. Half of my trips were planned in advance. Other trips were urgent and last minute. I wrote to Mary, "There's a problem with Whitaker's account. I'm going to the airport." Scott and I had a very quiet dinner that evening. After ordering a beer, I handed him the small stack of photos Mike had given me earlier that day. Scott was equally devastated for himself as he was for me. We agreed that divorce was the only option we were comfortable with and discussed the possibility of suing the insurance agency where Jenny and Mike worked. In the end, we decided to follow the advice of our divorce lawyer. We had been sitting at the table for over an hour when I saw Sal Morlo enter the bar. He looked around the room, noticed me, and headed in our direction. He stopped to shake hands and exchange a few words with people at various tables. Sal is a generation older than Scott and me. His daughter Trish came through our school system a year behind me. Sal owned a large car salvage yard just outside of town. 15 years earlier, when I was 16, I was practicing my serve on the school tennis court one summer day. Trish waved to me as she rode her bike past the court. A few minutes later, as I was picking up balls scattered across the court, I looked up to see Trish being forcefully pushed under the bleachers of a baseball field about 100 yards away by 5 classmates. I knew exactly what these idiots were thinking, and I knew that Trish was not that kind of girl. I ran off the court and within seconds found myself under the stands. Trish's t-shirt was taken off. She screamed, cried, and tried to cover herself, and the idiots pulled her shorts. Stan Malloy turned just in time for the edge of my racket to touch his nose. He exploded. Stan let out a blood-curdling scream as he fell to the ground. My backhand hit Joey Burns hard on the cheek, and he lost the count. I don't remember much after that. The 3 remaining idiots grabbed me and beat the crap out of me while I was down. After they received the last few blows, they became afraid and ran away. Trish continued to cry while I tried to compose myself. We left Trish's bike in the field, and she helped me walk to the car. I could barely drive, but eventually I pulled up to her house. Before my car had come to a complete stop, Trish jumped out of the front seat and ran to her house in tears. I had to get out of the car and walk around it to close the door that Trish had left open. As I closed the door, I heard a crash and turned towards the house. A huge bull man was running towards me. His face looked ready to kill. Only when he got close did he notice the damage to my face and my hunched posture. "You're Harrington's son," he growled at me. I could barely nod. I told him, "I think I need an ambulance, Mr. Morlo." I leaned against the car and slowly and painfully sank to the ground. Mr. Morlo turned and shouted toward the house, "Call an ambulance. Do it now." Mr. Morlo knelt down next to me, took my chin and turned my head until our eyes met. "What the hell happened to my daughter?" he wanted to know. "Some bastards dragged her under the bleachers at the baseball field." "It was you," he barked. I groaned, shaking my head. I practiced on the tennis court next to the field. Every word was given to me with pain. Fire flashed in his eyes as he asked, "What did those bastards do to my—" He couldn't finish his sentence. When I got to them, they had already taken off her t-shirt. They were trying to take off her shorts. She was still wearing her bra and shorts. If I wasn't in such pain, his icy gaze would undoubtedly have scared me to death. "I want to know their names. Stan Malloy and Joey Burns will be in the hospital when I get there." I smashed their faces with a racket. I told him the names of the other 3 bastards when the ambulance and police car arrived. Mr. Morlo leaned down until our noses touched. I smelled garlic on his breath. In a quiet voice, just above a whisper, he said, "If you ever need a favor, come see Sal Morlo." When Sal arrived at our table, he sat down without any introductions. I handed him the envelope with the photos and waited for him to look through them. When he looked up, I said, "There's a man named Michael Charmat. He's one of the bosses at Jimmy Sullivan's insurance agency. His hobby is making married women easy to get and sharing them with his friends. In the photos I showed you, he and his gang are with my wife and my brother-in-law's wife." Sal nodded in understanding as I continued, "I hope that soon he won't be so handsome, his gait will become less athletic, and he will have a hard time getting aroused." The three of us sat in silence for several minutes before Sal spoke his only words. "Since you're both going to be single soon, it would make sense if you joined a gym. Maybe you should go straight from work every damn evening. You could work out together for a few hours and then go and have a delicious dinner." He looked carefully at our puzzled faces before adding, "Do you idiots think you can provide yourself with an ironclad alibi every evening?" When he was sure we understood him, he rolled his eyes, nodded at me, stood up, and slowly walked out of the bar. I didn't go home as I told Mary I was away. Instead, I stayed at a nearby Marriott for the night. I was able to speak directly to my boss and briefly outlined my concerns to him. He agreed to let me work remotely and email my team that I would be traveling until next week. The uncomfortable chair in the corner of the hotel room was calling to me. I collapsed into a chair, closed my eyes, and thought about the events of the past weeks. It was obvious that because of the harsh stance I had taken towards her sister, Mary could not reveal her affair with Mike and his friends. She knew for sure that I would file for divorce. Mary was right, but as I think about the divorce, I hope I would have been fair if she had been honest and forthright. Instead, Mary continued to lie to me. I found out about her infidelity in a public setting, surrounded by my friends and colleagues. I can't imagine a more humiliating scenario than sitting in front of your wife's pimp and finding out that she is having sex with multiple partners. She has treated me extremely unfairly, and as a result, our divorce will not be fair. Instead, I realized that I had to destroy Mary. I swore to myself that I would destroy my wife, my love and best friend, in the most brutal way possible. An amicable divorce was not in the cards for Mary. I struggled out of my chair, walked over to the office desk in the corner of the hotel room, and began planning. It took me until almost 1:30 a.m. to map out a pre-divorce strategy for my lying, cheating bitch wife. If my plan fails, her heart will be broken. On the other hand, if everything goes according to plan, this bitch will be left broken and lying on the side of the road. The next morning, I was able to make an appointment with a divorce lawyer for the next day. Despite the advice of a lawyer, I did not begin dividing our finances. It can wait. I moved into an extended stay hotel and set up a remote office. I ignored calls and messages from Mary until Friday. At this point, I simply texted her that I would be away for the weekend. Her response was extremely frustrating, and she called all weekend begging me to call back. Over the weekend, I was able to purchase everything I needed for my plan. After I completed all the items on my list, I headed to the mountains for a long walk on Sunday. When I returned to the hotel, I turned on the phone and saw many messages and calls from Mary, all her relatives, and several colleagues. Apparently, Mary was extremely upset by my absence and tried to find me. On Monday and Tuesday, I worked from my hotel room. I tried to finish everything, since I would be gone the next day. Wednesday was D-Day. I checked out of the hotel after breakfast and headed home. Along the way, I drove through Mary's employer's parking lot to make sure her car was at work. I also installed a GPS device under her seat. It took me several hours to prepare the house, and I was finished by early afternoon. At 2 p.m., I lit a fire in our living room fireplace. Mary and I often enjoyed the fire on weekends during the winter. We sipped wine, talked, and hugged while watching the fire in the fireplace. But today was not a cold February day. It was September, and the temperature outside at the start of the day was 84 degrees. I waited until 3 p.m. and texted Mary, "Just got home." My phone immediately rang. I let the call go to voicemail, but Mary didn't leave a message. Instead, she wrote, "Bastard." I kept an eye on the GPS indicator on my laptop. I expected Mary to leave work immediately, but she was in no hurry. She wanted to show me. The fire burned brightly, and I continued to add wood to the top of the pile. At 5:05 p.m., when the GPS indicated Mary began her trek home, the temperature in the living room was muggy and easily exceeded 100 degrees. Perfect, I thought. Squeezing my heart and gritting my teeth, I waited for the bitch to come home. 3 minutes passed from the time Mary opened the garage door until she walked into the kitchen. I heard her drop her briefcase at the door and felt her presence as she stood in the doorway of the living room. She came in and saw me sitting on the sofa watching the fire. On the table in front of the sofa was a plate of cheese and crackers and a bottle of wine. I held a glass of wine in one hand. The second glass was at the other end of the table for Mary. "What the hell are you doing? It's unbearably hot here," Mary commented. As I turned from the fire to look at her, I asked, "What do you think I'm doing?" "I'm preparing a romantic reception for my wife." I noticed that 2 drops of sweat were already running down her forehead and cheek. Romantic. The words got stuck in her throat, and she didn't finish the sentence. Instead, she took a few steps closer to the fire, bent down, and picked up the half-burnt object from the stone surface. She picked it up, examined it carefully, and then took a step back and looked at the top shelf of the bookcase. I thought she might hurt her back by turning towards me so abruptly. Her eyes widened in horror as she showed me the burnt cover of the book. This was the only part of the book that survived the flames. Mary seemed unable to say a word, so I calmly told her, "We didn't have kindling to start the fire, so I used some old books." I nodded toward the empty space on the top shelf, where a whole series of books used to stand. "I only used 4 or 5. We still have plenty more for the next fire." As I spoke, I stood up from the sofa, took a glass of wine from Mary, and handed it to her. I saw her face go from bewilderment to rage. On Mary's birthday, her father gave her a book. It was the most popular children's book last year. On the first blank page, her father wrote a loving letter to Mary, describing his hopes and dreams for his daughter. He gave her such a gift every year on her birthday. She had 28 books, each of which recalled her father's love. I clenched my jaw when I saw Mary scream and start waving her arms. I'm not sure if she was going to hit me or if she was just furious. When her hand hit me in the face, it hurt like hell. Her hand cut into my left eye and her nails scratched my cheek. The contents of 2 glasses of wine spilled over the front of my shirt and trousers. Her face changed again, and when she began to cry, I again saw extreme bewilderment. Without saying a word, she turned and ran upstairs to our bedroom. I heard the door slam behind her. Although I was devastated, knowing that my marriage was over, I still smiled. My plan worked perfectly. When I looked in the bathroom mirror, I saw that my eye was red and starting to swell. Mary's nails scratched the skin, and a thin trickle of blood ran down my cheek. "Let's get this over with," I told myself, taking my phone out of my pocket and dialing a number. 911. "What is your emergency?" I heard it on the other end. "My name is Chris Harrington, and I need police assistance regarding a domestic incident. My wife assaulted me." After I dictated my address, the dispatcher asked, "Are you in a safe location, Mr. Harrington?" "Yes. My wife locked herself in our bedroom. I'll sit on the porch until the police arrive." "Do you need medical attention?" asked the dispatcher. "No, I wasn't hurt that bad." As per procedure, the dispatcher remained on the line until the first police vehicle arrived. I knew that my call was being recorded, and I tried to answer her questions very carefully. Almost immediately after the first patrol car pulled up to the side of the road, the second one arrived. The 3 policemen crossed the lawn together. "Thank you for coming, officers." "What's going on here?" asked the old veteran. I turned my head so they could see the damage on my left side. "My wife, Mary, hit me." "Why did she hit you?" he wanted to know. I wanted to be careful with my answer. I said, My wife has been verbally abusive to me for the past few months. I suspect she is confused. She is hiding an affair that she thinks I don't know about. In fact, I was planning to serve her with divorce papers tonight. When we talk to your wife, will we find any damage? I have never touched my wife or any other woman with aggression, was my honest answer. One of the young officers asked, "Do you have any weapons in your house?" "I have several guns. They're all in a safe in my office. My wife doesn't have the code for the safe." When two young officers entered the house to talk to Mary, I said to the third, "Do you want to see the video of my wife beating me?" He squinted, trying to comprehend my words. It took a few seconds for him to ask, "Do you have evidence of an attack?" "I haven't looked yet. I think I have proof." When I finished, I motioned for him to follow me. My laptop was sitting on the kitchen counter. I needed to wake up my computer and find cloud storage. I opened the folder, rewinded the video 30 minutes ago, and found the beginning of our conflict. I pressed play and stepped aside so the policeman could see everything clearly. He watched until Mary left the room and ran upstairs, and then asked to look again. After the second viewing, he pressed the calm button on his shoulder and said, "Arrest Mrs. Harrington." Almost immediately, I heard Mary screaming upstairs, and my heart started beating faster. I knew the officer had asked me a question, but I needed him to repeat it. "Are all the rooms in your house under video surveillance?" It was a question I wish I could have avoided, but I knew I had to answer honestly. "No, the living room is the only room with a camera." He nodded in understanding and scratched his chin in thought. "How long have you had the camera in the living room?" I shrugged and admitted, "This is a fairly recent acquisition." Our duel of glances was interrupted by Mary screaming and pleading, "Chris, what the hell is going on? Please, please help me." I was about to respond when one of the young officers shouted, "Sir, this is a police investigation. Please leave the premises immediately." He was talking to an elderly man standing in the open front door of my house. With equal determination, the man said, "I am an official bailiff and here to serve a summons on Mrs. Mary Harrington." He marched towards Mary as all three officers took a step closer in case the situation got out of hand. The man asked, "Are you Mary Harrington?" When Mary nodded, he held up the envelope and said, "Mary Harrington, you have been notified. In addition to the petition for divorce, there is a restraining order prohibiting you from approaching Mr. Christopher Harrington, his home, and his place of business." Since Mary was handcuffed, he handed the envelope to the officer holding her elbow. When the bailiff left, I turned to Mary. I watched as the panic and confusion faded from her face. They were replaced by calm. She looked at me and asked, "How did you know?" "Mike told me." As the two young officers took Mary to the patrol car, the third officer gave me his business card and asked me to send me a copy of the video. I walked him to the door and watched as the first car pulled away with Mary. The senior officer stopped halfway along the path. He turned and asked, "I saw you at the pit stop sometimes, didn't I?" "Yes, I recognize you too, Sergeant." He told me, 4 years ago, I divorced my wife for cheating. I pay alimony, child support, health insurance, and a mortgage on the house she lives in with my children and her bastard lover. Maybe next time, when I see you at the pit stop, I'll buy you a beer and you can tell me what happened here today. I went to work the next day and was able to be relatively productive, getting through Thursday and Friday. I literally groaned out loud when I came home Friday night and saw my father-in-law sitting on my steps. When I pulled into the garage, I got out of the car and shouted, "Come here, Steve." When he came in, I poured 2 large glasses of Knob Creek. We sat at the kitchen table, slowly sipping our drinks for a few minutes before he said, "Did she cheat too?" I simply nodded. Is there hope? He wanted to know. I took a couple more slow sips before I could calm down and respond to Steve respectfully. I said, "It happened more than once and with more than one man." I took another sip and then told Steve the whole truth. And it wasn't just one man at a time. He looked at me in disbelief, and before he could answer, I said, "I've seen pictures and videos that make me sick." Steve slumped in his chair and turned pale. A tear rolled down his cheek. We sat together for a long time, each of us immersed in our own thoughts and memories. Mary and Jenny didn't learn this behavior from their mother or me. His piercing gaze was almost chilling. Everybody knows that. Several minutes passed before Steve stood up and walked around the table. When I stood up too, he hugged me tightly and sighed into my shoulder. After that, he slowly walked towards the door with the gait of an old man. Opening the door, he turned around and said, "Burning those books was a cowardly thing to do." I had completely forgotten about this trick I used to provoke Mary. I almost screamed when I said, "Wait." I left the kitchen and returned a few seconds later with a small box. I gave it to Steve. Opening it, he looked at me with a stunned expression. I said, "I know you valued these books and would never destroy them." Then, he was too stunned to finish his thought. I said, "I went to the bookstore and bought copies." As usual on Saturday morning, I sat at the kitchen table and looked through the local newspaper on my tablet. I smiled when I read. Hartford Times local section. West Hartford police are investigating a brutal attack on a local man as he left a bar in the city's Elmwood neighborhood. Michael Charmat was attacked in the rear parking lot of Top's Bar at approximately 10:30 p.m. His injuries are extensive and required hospitalization. A WHPD spokesman said police have several leads and expect to make a quick arrest. It was a bright and sunny November morning. I watched as a red Ford SUV parked a few spaces away from me and the driver slowly climbed out of the car. "Hey, Mike, you look terrible." I was in the parking lot of Jackson Physical Therapy, sitting on the open tailgate of my Ford F-150. The bird whispered to me that Mike had an appointment at 10:30. I continued, "Maybe you should get a handicap sign so you can park closer to the building. You know, like other handicapped people." In addition to the damage to his knees and legs, Mike also suffered a broken jaw that would remain fixed for another month. "Did the cat swallow his tongue, bastard?" I asked with a grin. You have to give Mike credit. He limped towards me, leaning on his cane, and stopped 10 feet away. He knew that Scott and I had been questioned by the police and later cleared, but he probably knew deep down that we were involved in his beating. Now he knew for sure. The hatred in his eyes was palpable. I was sure that Mike was imagining terrible torture that would last for months. I was sure that Mike and I would meet again in the future. I didn't want to look over my shoulder for the rest of my life, so I arranged this meeting. Mike turned slowly and took the first step when I said, "Mary Marie Charmat from Milford, Connecticut." When he turned back, I continued, "Susan Burke of White Plains, New York, and Lori Fitzpatrick of Brockton, Massachusetts." The hatred in his eyes gave way to confusion. I continued, "If anything happens to me, if I get in a plane crash, drown on vacation, fall down the stairs, I will arrange for my friends to visit your mother and sisters." I noticed a slight trembling in his hand holding the cane. "My friends will break their faces just as they broke yours. They will hurt their legs, like your legs." "And Mike," I wanted him to listen carefully, "my friends will kick them between the legs like they kicked you." I waited a few moments for him to digest the information before finishing. "While your mother and sisters writhe in pain, my friends will tell them that their beating is your fault." I was surprised. Mike looked at me for several long moments before nodding quickly. I wasn't sure if he understood or declared a truce. He turned and walked towards the building. I'm happy to say that this was the last time I had contact with Mike Charmat. I did give my divorce attorney power of attorney to handle all legal matters related to our divorce. We didn't have children. We earned about the same amount. And most importantly, I didn't care about anything other than getting away from Mary. A few weeks after I served Mary with the papers, I received a call from my lawyer. She said, "We've almost reached an agreement on the terms we discussed. However, Mary won't sign the papers until she talks to you." I muttered a curse word and received advice. Just do it. Sit down and let her talk. Let's get it over with. Here's what I'm proposing. Have Mary sign the papers and you approve everything so it's official. I'll meet her for an hour in your office conference room after she signs the papers. I heard, this should work, before the call ended. 3 days later, I was sitting in a conference room. June, a paralegal, knocked on the door, opened it, and said, "Everything is signed and notarized." She nodded and walked away from the door, leaving Mary standing in the doorway. Obviously, she had gone to great lengths to dress up and put on makeup, but it didn't matter. Mary was stunning, at least to me, even in a sweatshirt and ponytail. She walked around the table, leaned over and kissed my cheek before sitting down across from me. "Are you as nervous as I am?" she wanted to know. My first thought was, what a strange way to start, but I thought about her question. I shrugged and admitted, "I'm not nervous. I'm more excited. I want to get this over with and start a new life." Tears ran down her cheek as she said, "I was blackmailed. Mike was going to put the video of Jenny on the internet. Her father called me early in the divorce process and said the same thing, so I wasn't surprised. It might have started out as blackmail, but I watched the video. I saw you get pleasure thousands of times. You begged for more. You begged so they can take you harder. I was getting angrier and I needed to calm down. After a few moments, I continued. You may have felt forced, but that's no reason to ruin our marriage. Just because you found out that Jenny was a prostitute doesn't mean you have to turn yourself into one." Mary exploded. I was so confused and didn't see any alternative. What could I do? You could, and should have, trusted me. I got angry when Mary rolled her eyes. I continued. Together with Jenny, we would go to the police and write a statement. We will never know if the police were able to gather evidence to do anything. We know his wife and employer would have found out, and we would have received at least some satisfaction. And more importantly, we would still be together. Unfortunately, you didn't trust me. Honestly, I don't know if you ever trusted me. What nonsense are you talking about? Mary wanted to know. I answered with a question. Do you remember why we broke up the first time? For the first time? You mean in high school? Mary looked completely confused. What does that have to do with anything? In high school, you didn't trust me enough to tell me you wanted to help your neighbor Jimmy and go to prom with him. You've got to be kidding me. I was a dumb high school student and afraid of hurting the feelings of my first serious boyfriend. Where are you two, a dumb college student? I asked. When she looked at me questioningly, I continued, Labor Day weekend, before you went to college, we made love on a raft on Lake Simpson, and after we promised that we would stay faithful and get married after college. Your promise lasted 10 years, days. Mary asked angrily, are you saying that you were completely faithful during your first year of college? I shook my head and ignored her pointless question. What I'm saying is, whether you agree or not, I doubt whether you ever trusted me. I don't think any of us would claim that I have every reason to distrust a word that comes out of your mouth at this moment. Outright lie. When you're not lying, you're playing with words and hiding the truth. Trying to change the direction of the conversation, Mary told me, I haven't seen Mike since all the trouble started. When I grinned, Mary asked, what? Mike was in an accident. He can't perform at his previous peak level. What are you talking about? Asked Mary. With a smile from ear to ear, I replied, among his many injuries, he had ruptured both of his important male organs. One was surgically removed. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she asked, how could you know? I know, because that's what I paid for. She covered her face with her hands and looked at me with wide eyes across the table. He's an evil man, Chris. I am afraid for you. I met Mike a few weeks after the accident, and we had a very civil conversation. I'm pretty sure I convinced him that it was time to end our partnership. Mary's expression changed from fear to love. I've seen this look countless times over the years. Do you still love me? She almost screamed. I was so surprised by her outburst that I laughed. Mary was clearly upset and said, "You can't tell me you don't love me." I shrugged and told her, "You're right. I can't say that I don't love you. I also can't say that I love you, and make an effort to cultivate whatever love is left in me." Mary almost exploded. "Why would you say that?" "It's simple." I looked her straight in the eyes and said, "You're not worth this." Mary leaned back and visibly shrank in her seat. Tears continued to flow down her cheek, and I could see that she was breathing through her open mouth. I reached into the folder lying on the table in front of me and took out 3 photographs. I placed the photographs in front of her one by one. "The main thing for me is my future children, and I deserve someone better than this vile woman, like our mother and wife. Goodbye, Mary." Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to